Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sinead Finnerty-Pyne, and I head up the Public Outreach and Communications for Lorcan O'Hurley Architects, LOAJ. It's a pleasure to be here today to bring together this panel of talented individuals with a broad range of expertise in community engagement and activism. This panel is the first of two conversations on the future of the public realm from a Detroit point of view. Tomorrow we will listen to a panel of architects, Lorcan O'Hurley, founder and design principal of LOHA, Melissa Dittmer, Chief Design Officer of Bedrock Detroit, and Stephen Lewis, principal at CGF Architects, former Director of Design for the Central Region of Department of Planning for the City of Detroit. And they'll be discussing how we can apply design thinking to help solve some of these challenges that we're facing. We're currently at capacity for both panels, but we will be streaming this on Facebook. On Facebook Live. So anybody who you know who isn't able to join us, you can please send them a link. And additionally, Azura Magazine, who's the co-sponsor of Detroit Design Month, will be rebroadcasting this on their website. So if you missed it, there will be an opportunity to view via their link. So yeah, so many changes have come about. I just wanted to preface this. We proposed this panel discussion back in April. And I just want to say kudos to the Detroit Design Month for pulling this off and putting together such a great festival. We weren't sure if it was going to happen. We were entering into COVID at the time, and clearly we wanted to respond to COVID and our reality, our COVID reality. And so we were inspired to present this theme to you today. Other events, obviously, that have come into play since then, the Black Lives Matter protests that have brought a new wave of attention to issues around inequity in our culture and our city specifically, bring a whole other layer and interest in this conversation that we'll be having over the past next couple of days. So as architects and urban planners with a commitment to the lived experience of architecture and particularly social engagement within the built environment, we felt that this was the time, the city, and the platform to have a dynamic discussion on the subject. Just to give you a quick introduction to who we are, we're Lorcan O'Hurley Architects. We are a collective of 25 architects and urban planners. They're focused in Los Angeles and Detroit. And our work is about the idea that architecture is a social act. So it's not just about designing buildings, but it's about really engaging with all the forces that are driving our world, social, political, environmental, economic, et cetera. So this idea of the social really extends beyond the building as to how people interact with our projects. So a critical part of the work we do is to carve away outdoor spaces and in and around our buildings to really blur the boundaries between the public and the private realm. And we believe that in this day and age, these kinds of spaces are as important as ever, as you know, basically people are flocking to outdoor spaces and opportunities to connect with each other as individuals and as communities. As human beings, we are really social animals, and although we're in the new social realm of social media and the virtual realm, we feel that that's not necessarily sustainable, that we still need to bring social spaces and physical spaces to cities and give those across all socioeconomic levels so that everybody has access. A number of our projects that we've been working on in Detroit, this one is part of our Northwest Detroit neighborhood study. We've also been working with Oluyemi Doubles on the African Bead Museum and helping him to a larger master plan for his campus. And then we're also doing four corner buildings at City Modern and Brush Park, which Lorcan will be discussing tomorrow, as well as Melissa Dittmer. I just want to take this moment to say that we also will be releasing a book this fall, which really tracks the trajectory of our work over the 30-year period and how our work interfaces with all of these socio-political events that are shaping the work and shaping the world in tandem. So without further ado, I'll say enough about ourselves, and I want to go ahead and introduce our panel today. So it's very exciting to have these panelists from all different sectors within community engagement in the city of Detroit. And they will be essentially, the impetus for this discussion is to really talk about how the pandemic can be reframed as an opportunity to consider how we can navigate cities differently and more productively so that they better fit the needs of all. So again, as I said, each of these panelists are within different sectors, and they all play a role in how the cities are shaped and really work to encourage equity and equality within the urban experience. So our first panelist today is Lauren Hood of Deep Dive Detroit. She's a native Detroiter and Afro-urbanist working at the intersection of Black inspiration and city change. Applying a reparations lens to the work, Lauren employs the strategies of storytelling, visioning, and relationship building to address the community's past harms, present needs, and future hopes and dreams. Lauren is credited and credentialed as a community developer and equity collaborator, and she holds space for otherwise difficult conversations and allow practitioners and citizen stakeholders to understand each other's value and contributions they can make. She is a recent recipient of the AIA Detroit's Charles Blessing Award, which recognizes her leadership in civic issues within the city. So congratulations on that, Lauren. And our next panelist is Abir Ali, who's a designer and strategist who is likewise focused on socially conscious city building. Her career is very diverse. It spans architecture, economic development, real estate development, philanthropy, public art, design, and craft. And her work uses design to create value-based systems and to position transformative investments that empower people and elevate places to achieve social and cultural returns. As an independent practitioner, she is currently working on creative grant making for the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation. And has led creative and social impact strategies for real estate development firm. The Platform. She has launched, directed idea-based competitions and place-based investment that support existing neighborhood businesses across Detroit. And we had the pleasure of working together on our Baltimore Station project in Milwaukee Junction. So welcome, Abir. Next, we have John George, who's a native Detroiter and co-founder of Detroit Motor City Blightbusters, a neighborhood revitalization nonprofit established in 1988. From a grassroots effort to keep his neighborhood safe and stable and blight-free, it's now grown into an internationally recognized organization with over 5,000 volunteers a year who are helping to tear down abandoned houses, renovate homes, and clean up parks and other places and spaces, as well as to help homeowners become business owners. So we've been lucky enough to work with our friend John on the Artist Village. We have a project there called the Obama Building, and we're working with the Platform to develop that project. And last but not least, we have Linda Samuels, who's an associate professor of urban design from the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts in Washington University in St. Louis. And Linda brings years of experience engaging topics on infrastructural urbanism, urban history and theory, and alternative sustainability metrics. She has studied and mapped comparative analysis of Detroit and St. Louis, and investigated spatial connections and also speculated on a number of neighborhoods in the city. And she worked in tandem with our principal, Ian Dickinson, on that effort. So she'll be talking a little bit about that today. And she currently has a book that's titled Infrastructural Urbanism that's going to be published by Routledge and released next year. And the book looks at how shifting the focus of infrastructure, which is our largest public realm, to the quality of life for all, it can become a catalytic component of an optimistic future. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the conversation over to our panelists, who will be giving a brief introduction to some of their projects and really discussing how their current projects have been affected by the current pandemic and how it's been impacted, and also some ideas they have, which we will convene in the panel as to how we can see this as an opportunity and really discuss some of the larger issues that are happening. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our friend Lauren Hood, who's going to present on her topic.
Thank you, Sinead. First, let me say the universe does not want me to be great today. I've had some internet issues, so if I pop out, let's just be comfortable with the fact that I will pop back in when convenient and possibly finish up or summarize. You might want to mute John. He left again. He's on the phone. Okay. So my work is predominantly in the changing hearts and minds space. A lot of the talks I do are around my approach and getting other people to kind of fine tune their critical thinking to change their approaches. So when you asked about, talk about the work that you do. So technically I get hired on teams, design teams doing either strategic plans for neighborhoods or parks, or around a specific physical development project. I usually get brought on as the person to do community engagement. But what I found is that title isn't really comprehensive enough to describe what I'm doing there. So I'm providing historical context usually. If you look at a neighborhood that has been disinvested in, that has been subject to policy violence, and you look at it and say, wow, that place looks terrible, it must be the fault of those people. That's because you don't understand the historical context. I'm usually there to provide that. Also, I do consultant work in racial equity. So I'm bringing my racial equity practice to community development, and in a way that other practitioners who don't share the same racial identity as the people in the community they're working in can do. So I'm usually talking to my peers. When people say community engagement, like community is me, I am those people. I'm from the places that I'm doing the work in. So there's a different kind of conversation I can facilitate than somebody who's coming in from the outside. I also act as a translator. So being able to translate complex ideas that sometimes the technicians and the other planners can't convey to citizens, I'm usually there to act as a translator. So how do you make something like a mobility study exciting? How do you make blue-green infrastructure something that people understand? You can talk about the floods that happen in the basement every year as a way to get people excited about blue-green infrastructure, but you have to know what people's challenges are, what their value system is, in order to be able to kind of translate that highly technical stuff that we do. So I'm calling this unquantified expertise that I bring to the table as sort of a magic, if you will. Go ahead, next slide. So this is kind of the hierarchy that we work under as I see it in my practice. So when I'm on these design teams working on a project, usually the designers, so the architects, are atop this hierarchy. Next we have the technical folks, which are like the engineers, those people doing that traffic study. And then usually at the bottom of the pyramid are the people with what I'm calling socio-cultural expertise. So that historical stuff I talked about, being to lay out the cultural context of a specific place. That kind of stuff is kind of last to be discussed. And a lot of what I see is the technical conversation and the planning conversation happens in one place, and community engagement is happening over here. You call the community engagement person when there's time to have a public meeting, but if that person hasn't been embedded in the entirety of your process, you're not going to have quality engagement. You can't really convey what's happening in a planning process if you haven't been privy to those conversations. So in my mind, what needs to happen in our practice is that this pyramid kind of needs to flip. Also, what I see now is an inability on the part of technicians to be able to be flexible. We're dealing with some conditions that we've never seen before, and the technicians aren't really comfortable with what that change looks like and being uncertain around it. You can go to the next slide. So really what I see on the part of my colleagues that are more technical experts is this fear of the unknown. It's my contention that those of us that are trained in the more socio-cultural kind of fields can adapt better. So in this planning project that I'm working on right now, we really struggled with how to incorporate a reaction to COVID I let my colleagues know that people in the neighborhoods that we're working in are grieving. People are, they're stuffing money in the mattresses. There's no consumer confidence. So the fact that we keep talking about what kind of new stores we're going to bring to this commercial corridor really doesn't make sense in this post-COVID world. And we struggled to make room for the racial uprisings as well. So one of the things that we heard from community members in this process, we have virtual community office hours every couple weeks. And what people said they wanted to work on was the fact that people of different racial groups don't really get along. So that was something that was expressed before the racial uprisings. But even though what happened across the world made room for that kind of conversation, like this team really struggled with how we make room for it. And I'm an expert in it. I was like, I got this, let me do what I do. But you know, there was some resistance on the part of my colleagues, but I think it's because people aren't comfortable having these uncomfortable conversations, and it's kind of my specialty. But I kind of struggled with, like, are they unempathetic? Like, why don't we want to have these conversations? Is there not enough data? Like, what's the hang up? And what I reduced it to was just a fear of not knowing what to say or what to do, the fear of making a mistake, the fear of offending somebody. At the core of why they weren't willing to change was really this fear of the unknown. Next slide. But in my mind, instead of being afraid, it's really a time to be bold. So for myself and other people that work in the DEI kind of racial justice space, we're all looking at this moment as a huge opportunity to make all those asks that we've been kind of timid about in the past. I don't think that me in my practice several months ago would have used the word reparations publicly like I use it amongst my peers in this work. And we've been thinking about it, reading about it, talking about it. But I think given what's going on across the world right now, it creates a moment where we can really be bold and say reparations, and people shouldn't recoil in fear. People should be like, tell me more. And I think it's a moment where we can have really, really provocative conversations when in the past we couldn't. Next. So I've developed some principles that really kind of define my approach to the work. And like I said, it's a moment where we can use these words and they shouldn't be scary. So yes, I know that's not how you spell reparations, but at the root of the word is the word repair. So I wanted to break that down. Like, what could that look like? Why don't we, when we're doing place-based work in particular communities, why don't we approach it like we're there to repair some damage? You know, we're usually there on behalf of some developer who's got a project, he wants us to get buy-in from people. But what if we took the approach that every time we're working on a project, we're there to do some repair? So what does that mean? Like I said before, historical context, super important to understanding what's going on in a place. Even more important in understanding why a people are the way that they are. So I've had colleagues say, well, why is everybody so angry when they come to the community meeting? It's like, if you knew the history of this place, you wouldn't have to ask that question. So what are you trying to understand before you enter a place and have a conversation with people about that place? It's super important. Empowering people, that's pretty self-explanatory. Like, what can we do as designers, other kinds of planning and development practitioners to kind of be the wind beneath folks' wings in these processes? How do we get out of the way and make more room for people, citizens of these places who are going to be the most impacted by whatever we're doing, to be involved and kind of take the lead? Preserve the culture. In a lot of the conversations that we're having with people, we're finding that they aren't just afraid of being physically displaced, but sticking around and having new people make them feel like outsiders. So what does it look like to preserve the existing culture of the place? And we have to be aware of what our own value system is. We can look at a place from the outside and be like, there's nothing there, but the lens that you're bringing to your work really shapes what you see. So you've got to ask people that are of that place, like what they think is important and what they value, and, you know, get in conversation with them about what is the culture of this place, what makes it unique, what makes it not like other places, and how do we preserve that? Redefining so the A in repair was redefining assets. So usually when we're doing like an asset map or an inventory of a community, we're thinking of the buildings. We're like, oh, there's the school, there's the park. It's my contention that there are people in communities that are assets. So who are the culture bearers of the place? Who's been there a really, really long time and knows all the history? Who's been there a long time and knows all the people? Like, who are those connectors? When we're thinking about assets of a place, it's not just the built environment. We got to be thinking about the people and the relationships and the networks that are in that space. And what was the last one? Oh, restore the spirit. So it's my contention that if we spent more time focusing on restoring people's spirit, communities would then follow suit. Like the benefit would kind of happen outward from the person. We always start with the built environment. Like, what do you want in that vacant storefront? Let's spend hundreds of millions rehabbing that. But if you don't do anything for the restoration of the people and their spirits, no one's going to go to that place and no one's going to take care of it. You have to put more energy into restoring people's spirit than we do into restoring the built environment. And I know that's hard to hear for a lot of architects because that's your whole thing. And then what's next for me in terms of my work, I find that usually when I'm on a team, I'm not just doing the work as assigned, like convening the public conversation, doing the engagement piece, but I am also teaching my peers and colleagues about, you know, how to filter their approach so that what we're doing actually benefits people. So I've kind of formalized that teaching piece, and I'll be launching an institute at the beginning of next year that will offer classes and programs that can get people trained up on how we can better serve community members with the work we're doing, and also offer classes for community members. In my initial thinking about it, it's kind of like a buy one, give one. So fellow practitioners, you'll have to pay, but community members should be able to go for free or subsidized rates to kind of learn more about planning and development, but not just stop at how we currently do it, also do work that speaks to people's imaginations, because I feel like the way that we currently do the process addresses like, what are your problems now? People are like, well, I want lights and I want my trash picked up. Like, that's all you want for your community? Like, how do we prepare for the future that you really, really want? So we got to stimulate the imagination. So teaching people about how we currently do it, but also make room for visioning and stimulating the imagination so that people can have the futures that they want and restore their spirits.
Fantastic. Well, sorry, I didn't know that was the last slide. Lauren. So we're going to go ahead and get back into some of that in our discussion. But thanks for introducing us to what you do and how you do it. Sorry, there's a wonderful ambulance driving by at the moment. So Abir, want to go ahead and launch into some of the work that you've been doing, and obviously working with this idea of space before pandemic and kind of post-pandemic, and maybe talk a little bit about your strategy and how things have changed for you.
Sure, thank you. I think that I will transition out of what Lauren was speaking about, because something she said really resonated, and that's the pyramid. And so who's at the top of the pyramid? Who's at the bottom of the pyramid? Who are the decision makers and drivers? And in the work that I do, typically my clients are real estate developers and philanthropy. And so often you have them at the top of the pyramid. And so the question through the two examples I will give is what happens when you reverse that decision making or ask certain people in power to kind of get out of the way a little bit. So before pandemic, the word space was very literal to me. I was working in real estate development. I was really focused specifically on one neighborhood in Detroit, New Center, and in one very prominent building, the Fisher Building. So built in 1928, designated a historic landmark, and it was celebrated and still is as the largest art object in Detroit. So next slide. So if you've gone into the Fisher Building, you know it's stunning, it's gorgeous, breathtaking, all those words, pretty significant in that it was built under 2 years, but it was, and it's an office building, right? So you have shopping on the ground floor, which was pretty special for its time, and office above. So retail and office, and though it's this stunning building. And so we asked the question at one point, well, like, how do you pay homage to a building that's built by this creative army, this creative force of architects and artists and artisans? And so sometime in 2018, we wanted to really look at that history and think about how we're actually inviting that kind of energy back into the building. So in some ways, with a building that's known as the largest art object, it would seem obvious to make sure that you're inviting people in a meaningful way that actually do that type of work. But in reality, when you look at the convention of it being an office building, that's not typically what's expected. So next slide.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
A little, okay, there we go.
So there's like 700,000 square feet to this building. There was one floor in particular called the fourth floor. Well, it is the fourth floor, and then we started calling it the fourth floor. That was medical offices back in the day, dentist offices, doctor's offices. And at the time that I was working on understanding this building, it was 72% vacant. So there's a lot of interesting work that happens when you work with a developer, in that, you know, they want to maximize every single square foot of a building and generate revenue in every way they can. And because it's a historic building, you have to do so with sensitivity. You can't knock down walls. It just is a bad look all around. And so what does that mean when it's in the hands of a pretty traditional real estate developer and they want to maximize profit without actually changing the floor plate? It's a little bit of a difficult scenario, right? And so rather than trying to make it something it's not, we decided to instead look at it as an opportunity. Would you rather have dormant space that's doing nothing, or would you rather activate that space in a meaningful way? And so this is when we started looking at it as an opportunity to invite in a kind of genre and talent of people that aren't otherwise invited into a prominent historic Art Deco building. Next slide. So we planned it out a little bit. We kind of moved very quickly, and we said, okay, we are going to dedicate this floor to emerging creative practitioners, and we're going to test this over 3 years. So the whole drive was to meet them where they are, which is immensely important, and that kind of shows up again in my work. And for development and for this project, meeting creatives and artists and designers where they are means really looking at affordable lease rates, realistic lease terms, attainable insurance requirements, and time and space to get to market if that is their trajectory. So we wanted to be really transparent about that. I mean, the reality is that there's a very negative association at times between real estate development and artists. And so we wanted to make sure that we were creating an opportunity, being transparent about that opportunity, and making it super flexible. And the questions were, what happens when you give a prominent, when you offer a prominent address to creatives that are establishing their practice? What happens when a dormant floor is given a second chance to be something else? And what happens when new and unexpected life comes into a building? Next slide. So we went ahead, we white boxed some spaces. We did it quick. We kind of stepped back, word of mouth, invited folks in, and then started looking a year later at what happened. And so we ended up rehabbing in 2 phases, with the second phase being 6 months earlier than anticipated. We broke even on the initial rehab investment. We added 30 new creative tenants to the 4th floor, and we grew the occupancy from 28% to 50%. And then, more important than what it did for the developer in terms of returns, we really wanted to understand, what did it do for the folks that were up there? And so we started to ask them questions. We were following them a lot. We were getting to know them. And so a year in, we said, well, we want to understand how you grow, because really the success of this is dependent on the success of you all. So the creatives that were there, and this is like a mix of folks. So you have fine artists, you have designers, art therapists, podcasters, architects. You have a wide array of people that are in different phases of their career trajectory and their practice. So some folks are just out of school, and others are retiring and entering a second phase of their life. So what happened with them in this space was that in a year they grew by 11 employees collectively. They added 281 new pieces of work to their portfolio. They got 18,900 additional social media followers from being in the Fisher Building. They added 295 new clients, and they generated $289,000 in additional revenue. Next slide. So that was the work that I came out of. It was now we're 8 months later, and I am in the foundation world. And so space, particularly in this context, now has focused on something a little bit different. Whereas the work at the Fisher Building was physically concentrated in space, it was also making space for tenants that are not always invited or expected. And so now with the work I'm doing in philanthropy, it's really focused on Gen Z and after school. And so space in this sense is very different. We all know that, I mean, for us adults, a lot of what we love to do has been canceled for better and worse. And for kids, that is central to what they're going through right now. So next slide. So this is a really boring slide when you look at it at first, but it is kind of testament to the way folks love to look at data. And so when I walked into this project, it was all about teens. It was, I mean, I say that's supposed to be all about teens. And so I walked into a lot of data that said, this is what teens wanted. And then the intention was, we're gonna move beyond data, and then we're gonna figure out how to make grants. And so the reality is that when you look at this new world and this transition we're in, and you think of teens, they rely heavily on space and on connection and on their peers and wanting to be out and about. And so when we stepped back and kind of had this reality check and said, okay, well, look at what pre-COVID, the data was a certain way that really concentrated on place and space. And hey, the reality right now is that not all of these are fundable moments. And then in many categories, many of these aren't. Next slide. So, I mean, one of the things that we'll get to is like, who has the answers on what to do next, right? We at least are all agreeing that between multiple pandemics, health pandemic, weakened economy, racial injustice, presidential election, we're experiencing all this now as adults, but for Gen Z, this is actually defining their experience into adulthood. And I think is immensely significant, and we don't always, as the grownups in the room, recognize that. And on top of that, I mean, I think we have to understand that Gen Z is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation ever, right? There's a whole lot of perspective that these young people have to offer, and they're feeling all kinds of things, and nobody has the answer. Next slide. So what is the answer? We know that the problem is that teens are experiencing a lot of anxiety, their lives have been disrupted, but on the flip side of that, the organizations that are used to working with teens are also trying to navigate a really uncertain space. They're trying to understand how to evolve and recalibrate to support the teens that they love. So, you know, the reality right now is that places, spaces, and activities have been shut down. So who's the expert on how to make it through this period of time? Is it the youth organizations? Is it the funders? Is it government? Is it leadership in different ways? Next slide. Yeah, that way. So the work I'm doing right now, it takes the position that the people who are being served, who are central, are the actual folks who should be the catalyst for the answers. And in this case, that's actually the young people and teens. And so what we've been doing is we've been working with teens to develop a grant making program. We hired them, we paid them as much as we paid adults for a consulting perspective. And, you know, we really recognize that before the pandemic, so many people love data, but data is just data. It's nothing without authorship. It's nothing without identity, and it needs this kind of life. So this is where we're kind of focused right now. How do you attach the what we want to the why and how it should be done? And how do you position the folks that are central to this, in this case, teens, to be in a position to drive those decisions? Next slide. So the question we're asking is, how do you reimagine after school in a changing world? And this is a question that across so many industries is being asked right now. And so what we are adamant on is building an approach, at least from a grant making perspective, to really approach this work and where to put money and who to listen to through a lens of values. And so some of the values that we're working with right now is One, first and foremost, give teens the mic first. They're often not asked, they're not in the first position to be asked for insight. Trust organizations to translate teen guidance. I mean, you know, the definition of expert and expertise between funders and grantees and the folks that are being served is all over the place. And the position we're taking is that teens who are central to this are the actual, they know what they want, and the organizations that serve them know how to translate what they want. Let them do their work in a lot of ways, just get out of the way. Teens and orgs know how to navigate each other. We're very much from a philanthropic program perspective, we're very much inspired by the fact that nonprofits have been doing this work. We're not the experts when it comes to this. Nonprofits are the experts. They've been taking the years to build the relationships. They've been taking the years to experiment with how to meet their audience and who they're serving, where they need to be. So let's just trust them to do that work. Reinforce value. So in other words, compensate people for the work they do. So in this case, it's not just about grant making to organizations, but it's also about supporting teens. And it's about doing that on both ends without preconceived requirements. And so that leads to using this moment of time. No one has the answers, it's all uncertain. So how do you invite experimentation without penalty to find what the answers are? How do you kind of redefine success when there are no clear answers right now? And so that's the space we're working in right now. That the definition of space right now that we're looking at is really making room for folks, particularly young people, and trying to kind of remind everybody that we were all young people at one time. You know, this is not too far-fetched. So that's the work I'm in now. The program is launching later this year, and there's more to come.
Great, thanks, Abir. It really segues nicely into John George and the work that he's doing in the Artist Village. And I know he's also working on a teen after school or a kids camp project. So he'll talk a little bit more about that. And gonna hand it over to John.
Well, thank you. I think it's important that I start this discussion on where we started as an organization and how we became the Blightbusters. I'll make it quick, because I know we have limited time. I happen to be a lifelong Detroiter. I have lived in Northwest Detroit for 62 years. 32 years ago, there was an abandoned home behind our home that became a crack house. At the time, I had a young son who was 2 years old, and my wife was pregnant with our daughter, Ann. We did not want to move, but at the same time, we did not want our children growing up in and around this negative energy. We considered it then, as we do now, a form of child abuse. I ended up getting together with two neighbors, Albert E. Mack and Felix B. Wright III, and we spent 8 hours on that first Saturday boarding up the crack house and cleaning up around it and painting the boards and cleaning up the debris. When the drug dealers came back that evening, they couldn't get in. They got in their Jeep and they left. And that's how the organization started 32 years ago this June. We have been meeting as an organization every week for the last 32 years. The Artist Village is a project that we started approximately 16 years ago. At the time, Alicia George, my wife, wanted a neighborhood coffee shop. We also met a gentleman named Chaz Miller, who's a master artist from Detroit. Chaz said he wanted a place to teach kids and paint murals. So when this abandoned building became available, the Blightbusters purchased it. And working with Chaz and Alicia and our corporate sponsors and our volunteers, we were able to transform this abandoned space into the Artist Village. And this is where we meet to continue our work. Last year at this time, we worked with over 5,000 volunteers. This year, because of COVID, we worked with less than 500. Our campus sprawls about 6 city blocks, so it's a challenge for us this year to maintain the land and the properties and the business district with a small staff and very few volunteers. But we continue to meet every Saturday at 9 a.m. We meet at the coffee shop, and we continue this work. Next slide, please. The Artist Village is really a neighborhood gathering place. We say it's where the world meets. One of the things that we learned early on for us to be successful is we had to include the kids in our work. That's why we've had, thanks to the Fisher Foundation and other sponsors, our summer youth employment program, where our neighborhood youth would work alongside our volunteers and our corporate sponsors on restoration projects, on mural projects, on beautification and cleanup projects, and work at Farm City. Everything that we grow there, we give away. We knew again that it was important for us to be successful, that we would have to, I've got some bees buzzing around me, so if you see me doing this, I'm trying to save myself. But the point is, it's because we knew that for us to make an impact, not only would we have to work with the youth, but we'd also have to work with their parents and the neighbors. Like I mentioned, I've lived in this neighborhood 62 years, and I pretty much know everyone, and a lot of folks know of our work. So we've built some bridges and some friendships. You know, we've helped over 400 people become homeowners in this city. We've helped about a dozen businesses open and thrive in our community. We've helped through our furniture donation program get these families beds and couches and tables and chairs and dressers, refrigerators and stoves. My point is when you help families take a house and make a home and create some opportunity with the summer youth employment, with the farm, with the arts, and the other things that we're involved in, the music, the poetry, the spoken word, you create a bridge, and over that bridge, you help each other and you support each other. It is really why we've been successful, is because we've known that it's important to include and invite everybody. Next slide, please. This is known as the Obama building. This building has been vacant and a disaster, if you will, for the last 15 years. One of the things that we did with our youth and our volunteers and our crew leaders was to keep this building boarded and clean and secure. And because of that and other reasons, we were able to attract a developer, Mr. Cummings from the platform. He's presently investing $3 million into this property. And we've been helping to show it to folks that might be interested in leasing the lofts upstairs or the businesses down. And my point was, if you keep your streets clean and you keep buildings secure and you invite everyone to participate, you create an atmosphere where people want to invest and people want to get involved and people want to help and participate in some way. This particular investment has really catapulted the stabilization and revitalization of this neighborhood. It's causing people to really take a second look at Old Redford and Northwest Detroit and the work that we're doing and our partners are doing to make it better. We're pretty excited about this. I've been working closely with Brandon from the platform and a few other folks that work there. And it looks like September, late September, early October, this building will be online and ready for lease and for its grand opening. And obviously we're looking to the next big project, but we're very excited about the Obama building here in Northwest Detroit. Next slide, please. Farm City, one of my favorite programs. This particular space and place has risen, if you will, on Orchard and Santa Clara Streets. We're just a block or two north of the Artist Village. This block had 13 abandoned houses on it at one time. Blightbusters, working with its volunteers and its corporate partners, hand-wrecked all 13 of those abandoned properties, many of them being used as crack houses and drug houses. You know, nothing really good happens in an abandoned building, and that's why it was important for us to remove that negative energy so we could create something positive. And Farm City is just that. There, not only do we produce fresh fruits and vegetables, but everything that we grow at Farm City, we give away to the community. It's another way of what I call spreading the Detroit love. When you help someone become a homeowner or a business owner, and then you provide, you know, fresh fruits and vegetables for their dining room table, you create a special bond and a special friendship. So we're going to continue to support the Farm City program, and we're going to continue to help our folks eat healthy. Next slide, please. The Java House is really the heart of the Artist Village and Old Redford. Like I mentioned earlier, it's where the world meets. Alicia has created, and her team, really a space where people from all over the world has come for different discussions, meetings, volunteer efforts, graduation parties, tea parties, birthday parties, baby showers. We've even had weddings here at the Artist Village. And the art has really become special thanks to Chaz Miller and some of the other artists. We have created a space that's beautiful and that is really, we've created landmarks and we've added value to this community by providing this art and this opportunity for people to participate in the art. Chaz Miller, when he came to us 16 years ago, his thing was providing public art, putting it on the walls so everybody could see it. A lot of our youth don't get an opportunity to go to the DIA and some of the other museums. So we have always supported Chaz and his work, and working with the platform and others. He's going to be creating a pretty special art show just a little bit later this year, not only at the Obama building, but also here at the Artist Village. Was there a slide? Yes, one of my favorite slides. This particular rendering is of the kids camp created by Gordon Sutterberg, one of our program directors here. The kids camp will actually rise at Farm City between the farm, between the crops and the farmhouse. This space and place ultimately going to be designed by our good friend Matt, who was the architect for the Obama building and his crew. But here's the thing about the kids camp. It's going to be built using shipping containers. It's going to have solar panels. It's going to have a greenhouse. And it's going to be a place for neighborhood children to come and learn about healthy eating, about how to prepare these fresh fruits and vegetables in a healthy way. There'll be a computer lab there that will help them. There'll be mentors on site that can help them with their homework. It's going to be really a great gathering place, again, for the youth of Old Redford and Northwest Detroit. Like I said earlier, we knew early on that we had to include the kids in all aspects of what we do, because ultimately they're going to be responsible for where we leave off and where they pick up. Was there another slide? Yes. Chaz Miller. As a matter of fact, that's Peter Cummings in the middle, Chaz to the left, and yours truly to the right. This particular mural, Chaz created earlier this year. This was a reboot of the original Martin Luther King mural that he painted on this wall probably 12 years ago. And it's right across from the Artist Village, right down the street from the Obama building. And thanks to Peter and his team, we're creating another gathering place in this parking lot. And this really speaks to what's going on today with the Black Lives Matter movement and how we have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, to create opportunity and hope for everyone, especially our Black brothers and sisters. And that's why we've been successful creating homeowners, business owners, opportunity and hope here in Old Redford. Right. Is there another mural or another?
That's it. I think
that is it.
Yes.
All right. Well, in closing, I just want to say that I want to thank everyone that's participating today. I want you to go back into your neighborhood and talk to your neighbor and see what you can do to help them make a better neighborhood for them and for yourselves. When you help others, you help yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And yeah, just wanted to clarify and thank you that Obama project is a collaboration between the platform and we are the designers of that building. So it's been really exciting. And Matt is one of the architects working in Detroit, which I'm sure he's listening in. Hello, Matt. And also just we have a team here in Los Angeles that's also been dedicated to that project. So really exciting and looking forward to having it come online here soon. In the coming month, I believe we should be, that the construction should be completed on that project. So, and last but not least, we're gonna turn it over to Linda Samuels, who is an associate professor of urban planning and design at WashU in St. Louis. And we've worked with Linda over the years. She contributed towards our book, Amplified Urbanism, that came out a few years back, and has collaborated with some of our team members here in Los Angeles. And we've done a number of kind of analysis of with the St. Louis area, but this was an interesting study that she did with, like I mentioned, one of our colleagues here at LOHA, Ian Dickinson. So just want to go ahead and turn it over. And this could be an interesting academic analysis of these two cities and how their paths are actually quite different, and how we can maybe learn something from Detroit's unique perspective and how it is engaged over the years. So I'll turn it over.
Thank you. Thank you. And gosh, listening to all of you talk, it makes my heart hurt. I really want to travel so badly. We just started our semester yesterday and we don't get to go to a partner city. But so I thank you, LOHA, Sinead, for inviting me to participate in this amazing panel. And I'm so happy to see some of you that I saw when we were on our trip. I do teach in urban design at Washington University in St. Louis, and I teach the very first semester of the Master of Urban Design program. And we often look at St. Louis, our home city, in comparison and contrast with a partner city that might have some similar typological features. So about 2 years ago, as Sinead said, Ian Dickinson and Patty Hayda, who was my co-teacher here, and I looked at St. Louis in relationship to Detroit. And we were particularly interested in looking at what we could learn from these sort of catalytic acupunctural design problems that LOHA was working on with groups like John George's group and others in the city of Detroit. So, and many of those were led, I think, by the then planning director, Maurice Cox. So I'm gonna show you a little bit of the analysis we did. So we're kind of taking a big step back, and then we're gonna talk a little about the projects and sort of what guides those projects. So really quickly, we looked at, as I said, a comparison and contrast between Detroit and St. Louis. As you can see from this timeline, both sort of temporal line at the top and spatial line below, these are two cities that had their population peaks in the early 1950s. So you see the sort of peak in the graph, and then you have kind of a steady drop in population happening up until today, 2020. So one major difference is Detroit is significantly larger in land area than St. Louis. St. Louis experienced what we call here the Great Divorce. So it was separated from a county. St. Louis is an independent city not existing in any county. Whereas Detroit sort of operated quite oppositely and began to annex property around the primary heart of the city to grow. So in addition to that population loss that you see in the top, you also see an increase in vacancy in the bottom. So both cities have in common a kind of peak in population at an industrial prime and sort of a reduction in population for all the reasons that we know about: disinvestment, white flight, increase in suburban infrastructure. And so those comparisons are pretty interesting. One of the reasons we came and looked at Detroit is Detroit really owns a lot of these grassroots efforts to reclaim some of that vacancy, because as we said earlier, vacancy is not vacant, right? Vacancy, all of vacancy has a history. Great. So as you can see in this slide, we do a series of what we call mappings. So mapping is not only about data, it's about analyzing, synthesizing, and visualizing that information to create comparisons. So we learned a lot of things by looking at the comparisons of these two cities. These are just two examples of a set of maps that we did, about 12 maps that we did. And the reason we do these maps, one reason is to really understand sort of the existing context. So this top map is, the students called it Bias and Blight. And this was a way to sort of identify neighborhoods with that long history of erasure and displacement. And so they looked at neighborhoods where urban renewal had occurred, where restrictive covenants were in place that limited who could own property or who could rent property. They looked at white flight patterns. And then they also looked at the availability of financial instruments like loans and mortgages and who was able to get those loans and mortgages. And as you look at those layers overlapping, you begin to see patterns in relationship of where certain things happen in particular cities. One thing that was true about, oh, sorry, if you could go back for 1 second. One thing that was true about both of those comparisons on the top set is that only about 10% of the mortgages are given to African-American families. The bottom set of maps real quick is about contamination, and that looks at not just contaminated sites and contaminated water, but there are very large circles that talk about coal, energy producing power plants run by coal and how much air pollution that provides in each of these cities. So you have a lot of unintended consequences from coal contaminating energy production outside of the direct city. So next slide, Sinead. Thanks. Obviously, as you all know on the panel, it's a different story to look at the data from a distance than it is to actually go to a city. So Ian was our direct contact, and we had the great opportunity to visit Dobbles, African Bead Museum. We visited some of the larger community gardens. And then we spent, this was a very quick 4 days. We spent 2 of those days doing a very rapid design charrette. And I think one thing that will be interesting to discuss is the real difference between kind of academic responsibility to learning objectives versus the real responsibility to communities, for those of you who are engaging directly in communities. The end of 4 days, we ended up at the bottom right slide, which is a typical state of exhaustion. The students just collapse after 4 days of traveling and visiting and working. The next slide shows one example of one of our projects, and John George is featured in the role, playing the role of Obama. And this was, it's so great to see the Obama building as a
Wow.
nearly renovated.
I want a copy of that.
I don't know that you, I didn't know if you'd seen this or not.
No, I have. That's first time. I love it. You're going to make me blush.
So it was great to see the building in its current state. And the students really look at very large scale infrastructure. So this was an analysis of how the big watershed that feeds all the water systems in Detroit, this site is not too far from the river. It's next to a golf course that the city's trying to figure out what to do with. But how does that engage with the micro components of the very neighborhood where John George is working with the Blightbusters? So this is one example of the 4 projects that we did in the 2 days that we started it in the 2 days they were working on that shred and completed it when we were back in St. Louis. So we work at the micro and the macro scale as that exhibits. The image on the right is the LOHA project, the Milwaukee Junction. And the little insert is an interborough project that is a kind of food truck that is sort of exemplifying that scale. So when we think about infrastructure, we're always thinking about the synthesis between big things and small things. And if you go to the next slide, I really call this infrastructural opportunism. And this is the strategy I use when I teach this urban design studio. And what I mean by infrastructural opportunism is to take these really large scale investments. And this example here is a competition that was completed about 1.5 years ago for the Shoto Greenway. And a greenway could be a bike lane and a pedestrian walkway, but the argument in opportunism is to leverage these really large investments for much greater social and environmental gain. So what we have here is, instead of just connecting the east to west, which is where the large financial investments are happening in St. Louis, we really wanted to also connect the north and south, which are some of the more disadvantaged and challenged neighborhoods in the city. So our proposal was about bringing new amenities, social assets, connecting to existing cultural and social assets, and figuring out ways that infrastructure can increase access and increase distribution of amenities rather than continue to add money to money, which is what we often see happening in the city. And then the last slide, we often hear about the 3 E's of sustainability: environment, equity, and economy. Sorry, I was like, I'm trying to reduce the emphasis on economy so much I've blocked it out of my mind. And what we did with this project was to say, well, they're all interrelated, but if we emphasize the role that we can have for advocacy, then we can create what we are now calling these advocacy loops. So we wanted to include not just the Greenway, but we talk about education and innovation, culture and heritage, health and food, finance and housing, and we distribute power. I think that's one of the themes of this conversation, is how do you distribute power to people who live in the neighborhood? So our proposal included community advocacy committee, artists of color council, and then a neighborhood council advisory team, which would always be a part of the project from start to completion and through programming. So to lastly just touch on the idea that things have changed in COVID, because I know that's really part of what we're talking about is I've sort of noticed three things that have been changing in my work, in my environment, and the writing I've been doing. And I think these would be interesting to talk about. And they each have a pro and a con. So the first one is really that we are seeing certain projects being fast-tracked while obstacles like traffic are out of the way. But I would say the inverse of that is that we are seeing certain projects being fast-tracked while quote unquote obstacles of communities are out of the way. And we need to be sure that those community voices sort of stay as part of the conversation. The second thing I've been observing is that we're at this moment where a lot of like tactical planning is happening. You're seeing pop-ups, you're seeing streets being closed for bike and ped expansion. And I would say what we want to remind ourselves is that recreation is not the same thing as democratization. So we have communities in neighborhoods and cities that have been waiting for years, if not decades, for improvements to their infrastructure, and they're being bypassed. And that investment is being given to communities that have more power. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. And then lastly, I just want to say, when we talk about public space, we really want to talk about public space, not only public space per capita, but we want to talk about public space that has real publicness, right? That connects people of difference, that connects across neighborhoods, not just connecting wealthy neighborhoods to wealthy neighborhoods. So those are the three things I'm noticing as both risks and opportunities in this moment of COVID. And I'm just excited to talk to this amazing group that's out here.
Thank you. So those are some great questions to present. And I think it is wonderful. Everybody's doing such amazing work in all these various arenas, you know, boots on the ground, influencing foundations, working with communities, and helping obviously with these larger academic studies. So I think the question is, how do we really bring all of these collective efforts to really influence the way that we're going to move forward with the public realm post-COVID. Obviously, it's highlighted so many of the injustices within our current situation. Who gets access to open public spaces, how much open public space is available. So how do we see that we can actually, you know, really help make these changes a reality? How do we, what are some of the steps we can think of to, you know, encourage different financial and development models that, you know, give public space or open public space up to all? I don't know who wants to, maybe, let's see, Lauren, do you want to jump in since you haven't spoken in a while?
See, it's tricky for me. I used to work in the space of thinking about what can others do to help make conditions better for marginalized groups. I'm in the empowerment space now, so I don't know what they should do, but I know what we should do. I feel like Black folks in our communities really need to nurture our relationships with each other. We have to learn about these civic processes and how they work and who the key players are, so we know who to leverage to make certain things happen. We need to celebrate our culture. We need to value our contributions. We need to demand payment for our participation. Whenever I ask residents to show up and do something, gotta give them some money. We get paid to do this work, and I know what architects and planners get because I see the rate sheets. We got to compensate people as if their expertise is really as valuable as it is. So we got to demand that we get paid for things and stop showing up for free just because it's our community and we love it. Yeah, we gotta empower ourselves to get engaged right now. Like I said before, it's a moment where there are huge openings to make bold and sustained change. We can't just treat it like it's a trend. This has to be a real pivot. And I think we can get there, but we have to, we need new leadership. We have to start valuing different kinds of contributions. There's so many things I need to say. I will give a plug for the piece I just wrote for the CNU Public Square. So if you want to go Google that, The Case for Afro-Urbanism, it's a whole approach that centers the experience of the marginalized person and how we do planning for the future. So a lot of what I'm trying to get through is in there, and you can go look that up, but I really think it's more about the people. I'm done waiting for somebody else to do the help. You know how I think it was Obama or Angela Davis, one of them said it first, that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. Like that's kind of the headspace I'm occupying right now.
Does anyone want to jump in there? I know, John George, you talked about a lot about community, just kind of, you know, from the efforts you've made in your neighborhood, and just kind of deciding one day that enough's enough. So, you know, you went on to found an organization, obviously, that is dealing with how to bring change from the bottom up and not wait for people. That seems like a very Detroit attitude. I think you want to speak a little bit about to maybe if Detroiters have a kind of a different approach to this pandemic than perhaps others, in terms of just like, all right, here we go again, or is it like, okay, I have these tools in the toolkit, or is it, okay, this is just, I've had enough. How can we, when does it end? But it would be great to hear from a Detroit perspective how COVID is perhaps, how people are handling COVID, and how maybe they can think about the future and how we can take some of your examples and your, anyways, I'm gonna let you speak.
Sure, well, thank you. Well, you know, there's nothing that is more about success than getting up and actually making something successful. I truly believe that we need a vaccine and a new president to move forward, not just locally, but nationally, nationwide and internationally. We need new leadership, and that's something that we're going to be working on quite a bit between now and November. But as it relates to Detroiters, I call it the Detroit attitude, if you will. We have weathered a lot of storms. We've gone through some pretty tough times, time and time again. So this particular pandemic has been a little bit different. You know, usually when there's a problem, I'll use Angels Night as an example, we would come together as a community and fight that problem. But with COVID, you got to disperse and fight that problem. So it's a different dynamic. But we've been obviously using our sanitizer, our gloves, our masks, and protecting each other and ourselves from each other. But it does add another layer of what, I don't know what the word is, but it adds another layer. Before you can move forward on something, you got to really armor yourself, if you will. But I think the lesson is that we've got to continue to work together. We've got to continue to support each other. We've got to continue to kill wasps and flies. We really have to look at this time as a time of coming together, and even though we're apart, and figure out how do we move forward? How do we create homeowners, more homeowners? How do we create more business owners? How do we create more opportunity and hope? And I think it has a lot to do with what we've done. I think we need to do a whole lot more of that. But this last year has really been a shocker in so many ways. I really thought as a nation we had gotten much further down the street than we obviously have. So there's a lot of opportunity to, again, support each other's work. We really have to come together and support each other. It's really the only way we're going to be able to move forward. We've got to, you know, we've got to put our petty differences aside. We've got to focus in on things that benefit everyone. And we've got to compensate our Black brothers and sisters for the injustice that has taken place over the last 400 years. We got to grow up and admit that we've made some pretty terrible mistakes, and that we've got to help people heal, and we've got to do whatever we can to help our brothers and sisters.
I want to just kind of jump on a little bit of what you were touching on, Abir, sort of in our earlier conversations about other perspectives and kind of leaning in and listening to what other community members who perhaps have been disenfranchised and some just simply ignored. And you were talking about teens and artists for that matter, who you've been working with for many years. And, you know, what kinds of things are you hearing from them in terms of their ideas about what the future of the public realm is? Because even as designers and community advocates and professionals, you know, we can only speculate so far, and that's all we could really do is speculate. But I would love to hear some of their thoughts on what the future of cities should look like.
So
say.
I think there's a few things with that question. Like when it comes to the young people that we're looking to work with between both regions. So the foundation that I'm with is now, or that I'm consulting with, is regional. So Western New York and Southeast Michigan are both represented in this work. And I think what was harder than I thought it would be was to really communicate that data is not telling you what people think. It's just a moment in time of a bunch of questions that were answered and aggregated, and it's literally, you can't capture like the dynamic thoughts of a person based on really still data. And so, I mean, I think first of all, that's a really important place to start is different people have different translations of what it means to invite people to speak and to actually listen to what they're saying. And so I'm coming from some worlds that look at data as doing that. And I think there is, first of all, such an importance in just saying it's not data, it's actually people, and it's their voices, and it's connecting. I mean, particularly in the world of teens, it's allowing them to self-identify and connect to the feelings that they have to who they are and what their place in the world is and what their lived experience has been to date. And, you know, we're starting to get deep into like what their ideas are, what the why is, what the how is. But I think what we're very much in like test drive mode right now with designing the program. And the one thing that kind of shook me to the core that I learned from at least the 18 teens that we've been working with as co-developers and co-designers is that they were so unbelievably grateful to just have the floor to be heard that it was almost disturbing a little bit, right? Because they just weren't used to being like first in line and ask questions. And, you know, many of them were describing their experiences right now with just school and after school or families. And you heard kids saying, you know, I went to this school event for back to school or this, and people were asking teachers what they think, and people were asking parents what they think. And there were a bunch of teens around, but no one cared to ask us what we think. They were just talking about us, right? But they weren't engaging with us. And it just seems like such a like ridiculously missed opportunity. And it was something that multiple kids between very different places were saying. And these are kids who are from cities, suburbs, towns, rural communities, right? There's such a diversity and such a mix that it was really interesting to hear that they had this common experience of like, no one's listening to us, right? And it's impacting us a lot. And so there's still a lot to be learned in terms of what they're going to say. And that's the whole point of the program that we're going to embark on. When it comes to artists, I think that it was more, you know, I come from the design community. I was a maker for many years, built a furniture practice with my partner. And often when you're in that space and you're not looked at as someone who generates a lot of revenue and you're looked at as an artist or a creative, it's usually like you don't have the pick of the litter in terms of space, right? And you're almost expecting people to say, here's my basement, you know, here's a basement space, or here's a building, but it doesn't have a freight elevator, or here's another building, but it doesn't really have water that's running, right? To be able to afford those lease rates, right? And in Detroit in particular, we have this romanticism around space and what that means. And so I think, you know, it's really important for me whenever I can to advocate for that community. And so when it came to the Fisher Building, of course, no one in a traditional sense thought like, we should include artists, we should talk to creatives, we should include creatives. They kind of, you know, the whole thing is we want to be associated with being this largest art object. But that doesn't necessarily translate to like letting folks from that in. And so I think, you know, for me, it was really interesting to say, well, why wouldn't you? You know, would you rather a floor be empty? And then we did bring them in, and they organically started to do everything that artists and creatives do, right? Which is find opportunities to like make things beautiful and produce work and show that work and share that work and collaborate with each other. And really, like, to me, their success kind of speaks to what they were feeling. And I think, especially I did another panel that was about this post-COVID world, or this COVID world, not post. I mean, I hope to be there soon. We all do, but like this in COVID world. And I made a point to say that so many members of my team are actually artists and creatives, because I value the way they think to such an extent. And I often think that from more like traditional disciplines like philanthropy and real estate, we don't, you know, the folks that are in charge don't usually think about what that diversity in thinking actually does to the discipline. And so for me, I think it's immensely important. So I'm constantly listening to artists and creatives, because I'm putting them in positions with the work that I'm doing to use that imagination they have and to use that insight and perspective to help build programs for people. I think that, you know, it's an important perspective.
I think that one thing, can I add something?
Yes, please.
One thing that you guys both sort of exemplify, Abir and Lorcan, which I think is kind of key to this moment, is that you have an interdisciplinary history. You know, that you've got a built-in multiplied perspective, right? So you can bring one of my 12 next generation criteria. My new number 12 is to repair, is to how do we figure out reparations, but is to work across silos, right? It's to work across agencies and across disciplines and across places where there have historically been barriers. And I've heard some people say, like, in a moment of emergency like we're in right now, the falling of those barriers to solve immediate problems is another real opportunity. If we can capture that moment of unintentional interdisciplinarity and unintentional cross-agency emergency work, if we can hold onto that, and if we can allow that to be productive for whatever comes next, that would be one of the amazing opportunities that emerges out of this emergency. And I would add one other thing, which is what I call measuring what matters. And you're both also referring to this. And I think this is one way we can think about the sort of top down and bottom up coming together. I hate those terms. I tend to call it like top up, because I think there's this merger of, you know, really good grassroots practices that are being happily absorbed in some good ways, and vice versa. But we have a distinction about what people think they care about. Abir, you mentioned data, right? You see government agencies like sustainability offices with their dashboards and they're measuring carbon. But we're talking about, like, how do we measure the value of culture? Or how do we measure the value of a diversity of voices? Those things aren't on the dashboards. And they're, you know, they're creeping in little ways, but we need to get people who are saying their city is successful to be measuring all the things that are not just economic indicators. There's a whole range of things that should be measured that create a better place for people to live. And, you know, we talk in some of my classes about alternative metrics. How do you measure whatever makes up quality of life? How do we determine what that is?
Quite literally, before this call, I was writing an email to my foundation partners talking about the importance of qualitative measurement and to be able to measure joy and experience, because it's so pivotal. And I don't know how far I am going to get in that argument, but like, it's something that is so common sense to so many people, but not always the ones that you want it to be common sense to.
Well, I can send you my article. We'll do another article plug. Thanks for setting that up, Lorcan. So I wrote an article called A Case for Infrastructural Opportunism, which talks about measuring what matters. And my class, we tried to measure hope, which was a really complicated thing to try to measure. But I think that's what you have to do, is you have to speak multiple languages, you know, and if someone cares about what the outcome is, you have to make sure the outcome matters to you. And you have to, you know, I think that's one of the places where power can get inserted into the conversation, is shifting what matters to measure.
So we have about 10 more minutes. I want to just go ahead and just really kind of think about that question that I started with, you know, how do we reframe the pandemic as an opportunity to improve the quality of life for all in our cities. I guess if you could do a bit of a kind of a projection outward, what do you think some of the long-term effects, and just in terms of what you're seeing with the way that, you know, our cities are changing in terms of how we're using outdoor spaces? We can see things like, you know, outdoor dining and people taking back the streets for pedestrian activity. Do we see these kinds of things lasting, or do we see these things growing legs? What other kinds of opportunities do we feel might actually begin to evolve into other opportunities within the public realm? And also, interestingly, how does the virtual realm play into that as well? And I just would love to hear your thoughts on how you see, you know, if you wanted to kind of speculate on taking a couple of years out, what do you think will stick, and what do you think will potentially go away?
I'm going to throw out some things that I'm glad are gone.
Mhm.
So I think we needed a micro-mobility reboot, you know, and we had a lot of private corporations appropriating public space for their own use. And that, you know, those are the million scooters and all of these things that were taking over sidewalk space. And it's not that we don't necessarily want a wide range of mobility. We do, right? We want a lot of great access. And when bike share first came to St. Louis, it was fantastic to watch people who had not ridden bikes for a long time get on bikes and capitalize on that. But I think the reboot to talk about what is the public realm for, and how do we make sure that it's not overtaken by capitalist interest only. I think that's an opportunity that we couldn't have designed, right? And so I think things that we couldn't have designed are interesting to capitalize on now.
Lauren, Abir, John.
Abir?
Did you want to go down?
No, go ahead.
Lauren, go.
Ladies first.
I think it's a moment to really work on our race problem. So even people who have people and institutions that have been historically afraid to have this conversation are now doing it anyway, because if they don't, they're going to get a side eye, you know? So for whatever reason, people are out there, whether it's superficial or genuine, they're out there having the tough conversation. So I think it's a moment where we can really start to do things differently. Like every sector is rethinking how they operate. In my racial justice consulting practice, I have like automotive clients, an architecture association, a restaurant group. So every sector is trying to rethink how they do equity. And I really think that it's a moment to, again, be bold in that area. Like we have to recognize that the way we were doing things didn't work. Like we can put a Band-Aid on it, and it won't take another pandemic to reveal, you know, the ways that we've been getting it wrong. We have to really sit with this. And my hope would be that people can get comfortable with the discomfort, and leaders are going to look different in this moment. There's a certain kind of expertise that white men don't have right now. We don't need y'all at this moment. There's a different kind of leadership that is necessary to unite people. And especially as we lean into our humanity. Like I was on a call earlier where the word professional kept getting used. It was a focus group, and we were asking different people of different races, like, can you show up your whole cultural self at work? And they're like, oh, it's not really professional. Well, who decided like being your whole cultural self wasn't professional? Like we got to change the way we think about all of this. And if we don't do it right now, then I don't know when there will ever be a better moment.
Completely agree. Did John, Abir, did you guys have any thoughts there? Oh, you're.
Who's supposed to go first? Abir? All right, well, I guess.
I think John wants Abir to go first.
Well, I always believe in ladies first.
Oh, well, you know,
maybe that's old
here.
fashioned. Maybe that doesn't apply any longer. I don't know.
Well, anyways, John, let's hear what you have to say.
All right. Well, obviously, we've gotten it wrong for a long time. and I agree. It's time for other faces to move us into new places. I mean, I've certainly done my level best over the last 32 years to create an environment where everybody is welcomed and everybody is valued. But I think the time has come for a new generation to move us in a different direction. I think as the old kid on the block, I'm 62, we've been doing this for 32 years. It's really time to pass the mantle. Of course, we'll be here to support those new faces and spaces and places, but it's their time now. And all we've ever tried to do is level the playing field and make sure that folks of low and modest means could become a homeowner, could become a business owner. We'll continue to do that, but we've ran the good race. We've done again the best that we could in a very difficult neighborhood, very difficult situation. But I do believe that the foundation is here for the younger generation to take what we've done and move forward and do more and do better.
I agree with everything that I'm hearing. And there's one thing in particular, Lauren, that you said that I have lots of conversations around, and I kind of love it. It's being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I talk about that a lot because, you know, I'm the daughter of immigrants that did not know each other's culture and ended up in a majority Black city and was kind of in between the suburbs and Canada in my entire childhood. And so I'm so used to there being no filters on things because of the experience that I've had with my own personal family. And just like raw honesty and being able to understand like a diversity of like white to brown to Black, right? That you have to hear everybody. And so I think I kind of agree if the thing that will stick is that we're now kind of comfortable being uncomfortable. Like Black and brown people have had to be comfortable being uncomfortable for a very, 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 very long time. And so it's a way of life and you don't even question it. And it's just the way you have to navigate this world. And I think it's about time that there is a bit less sugarcoating and muting of people and more kind of like, hey, this is a new world and this is a new time. And you're not going to know about everybody and everyone and where they're coming from. But you got to be comfortable hearing it. And so I would be over the moon. I mean, and this is very much the work we're doing with teens. Like adults are really afraid of what young people will say. Mm-hmm. And Gen Z has a lot of power, right? And I think they know their power in a way that's very different than other generations before them, you know? And so it's kind of fascinating to watch them that was born in this era of like content creation and consumption and a virtual world be able to do things like, you know, shut down conventions or completely change the narrative on things or cancel out culture. I mean, they have a lot of power. And I think that causes a lot of fear in the grownups that are running the world right now. And so I kind of have a lot of hope that particularly through them, they're so much more used to that diversity in people and thought and differences. And know how to come together more around that than maybe we do that are like, you know, boomers or Gen Xers or millennials. We're not so great. I'm kind of in the middle there, but I just think if that goes away, if the whole like you said, Lauren, being professional and what does it mean to be professional and what does it mean to have to kind of mute yourself to an extent to function within these certain industries and spaces, if that goes away, and there's this larger comfort with just like, you may not know it, but you're going to hear it. You may not feel it, but you're going to know that someone else feels it. I mean, the better. Yeah, for sure.
because this is all very uncomfortable, right? I mean, it's very uncomfortable to be, well, it's actually in some ways amazing that I get to speak with all of you at one time in one place, and I don't have to leave my neighborhood. But it also feels very disconnected to be, seeing all of you in this realm and all these little things that I'm noticing in the background. And it's like, it's okay. This is where we're at. This is where we're all at. We're all in our homes. We're all doing the best we can. And that is our new social reality, I mean, this is where we're at. So I love what you said about being uncomfortable in, or being comfortable in the, being uncomfortable in the comfort. What did you say again, Abir? It was
Get comfortable with the discomfort.
get comfortable with the discomfort. Yeah, because it's just going to keep going, right? We don't know how long this is going to be, and in a way we just continue to evolve as humans, and our spaces are evolving, and the way that we're coping with this is evolving, and we can't measure these things because everything's happening too fast to do so. So it's just really interesting and fun to have these kinds of conversations, and this is what informs the work that designers and architects and artists and everybody is doing. So it's really great to have you all here today. Thank you so much for participating. Thanks everybody for listening. Again, we had a little bit of an issue with the Facebook Live, but we are recording this, so it's going to be, we'll make sure it's available for people, and then it will be rebroadcasted again on Azure. So yeah, I just want to thank you, Linda, Abir, Lauren, John. Let's just keep doing the work, let's just keep fighting the good fight, and letting our voices be heard, and helping other people's voices to be heard as well in the process. So thanks again, and looking forward to continued conversations. And also lastly, I want to thank Design Core Detroit for putting on this series of events and allowing us to have this forum. And I also want to thank Azure Magazine as well for co-sponsoring. I want to thank all the people that are working with me here at Lorcan O'Hurley Architects in Los Angeles, and all of our partners in Detroit as well. And have a great evening. Take care, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.